Hi everyone and welcome to part 2 of the Brindle Greyhound on Pastelmat. And I'm straight in with some BE1 and it's time to start bringing out some of the right side of the dog's face. And in this hour you will see the top of the head be completed and you'll really hopefully get a sense of how long it takes to build up a brindle coat like this, how many layers I put into it, and although I'm not going to show you the entire face of the dog, I'm really trying to show you in as much detail as possible in this whole area on the top of the dog's head so that you can get a full overview of just how long it takes to build up really convincing brindle. It's definitely one of the coats that I spend the longest amount of time on. Such fine marks, so many different colours all mixed together. So it's a really tricky type of fur. And at this stage, I'm just trying to look at the highlights on the right side of the dog's face, pick out some of the structure. Greyhounds have such beautiful faces, but there's so little fur to hide under. You can literally see every bit of their bone structure. Similar with their bodies too, they're very graceful, sleek animals. But it's really important where each little bit of highlight goes, as it really affects the overall structure of the dog's face. And even if I've got the eye in the perfect place, if I don't get that area around the eye with each little ridge of highlight showing the cheekbones, the eyebrows, if some of that's off, then the overall effect will be off too. So I'm really careful at this stage. I'm still sort of drawing out the structure of this side of the face, making sure that I get it all in the right place. And this is A33. So while I do use some pure white on this side of the face, there's quite a lot of silvery sort of grey tones through brindle also. So I've got blues, purples, yellows, oranges, but also some of these in between off tones are very useful. The additional colours in Unison's range are great, but if you can get hold of nice subtle grey tones, I love this colour in particular as it has quite a lot of warmth to it. And then I'm coming back in with my BE36. I've still got a lot of darkness to add around this eye. But again, I've been focusing on smaller areas at a time, just making sure I get each part proportionally correct. And then tackling another small area. So it definitely helps me sometimes to split a project up like this. I normally come to the easel with an expectation of how much I'll get done that day, and it doesn't always happen that way, but usually I try to set myself a realistic goal, and then hopefully I get to feel satisfied that I've reached that goal at the end of the day. But that might just be, in some cases, a small patch of bluebells, or, you know, it might not be very much for a whole day's work. But I think you have to be realistic with yourself. Sometimes if you're going for a certain level of realism, you really just have to commit that amount of time to the piece. And I come back in with the black. I think this is the Conte crayon stick. I switch between it and the black Faber-Castell sticks. They're both a lot harder than the bigger, softer pastels, and great for these lower layers. Now I start to bring in some of my yellows and lighter brown earths, going back over the forehead and around the eye where I've added some of my dark marks, starting to pick out some of those lighter hairs, break up some of those dark areas a little more. And I continue with that for the next few minutes, just using very small marks, but mostly using the bigger, fatter pastels to get those small marks. And you can see how clearly they show up on the Pastelmat paper. It's really great for filming this paper, as I think it allows you to see absolutely every mark that I make really clearly. And now when I come back in with some black pastel pencil, I'm really using the pencil quite lightly, leaning in some areas where I want to make a really dark mark, obviously, but the rest of the time I'm really using the pastel pencil to shape the little marks of soft pastel. And I can also use my finger, as you see here, just to lightly blend and soften all of my marks together. So I'm really trying to take the harsh look off the fur at the minute. And on some papers you can blend a bit heavier than on others. If this was the UArt paper, I would be blending with a very light touch, as the pastel pigment moves around a lot on that surface. With velour I can afford to rub quite hard, as the pigment doesn't move very far, so it doesn't mix or muddy itself. And likewise on Pastelmat paper, I can do a certain amount of blending, but at the same time I don't want to overblend and lose the definition in my marks. So it's trial and error really. Go softly to begin, and with this I was really just lightly touching the paper and trying to rub the fur in the direction of the fur. And I found that that was just enough once I had several layers of marks on the paper like this, just to give it a light rub, seemed to really soften the overall effect. And again, coming back into those black areas, especially on the side of the face where the sunlight is hitting. And you can see that I come back to do a similar job several times throughout a painting, each time adding a little extra layer here and there. But I think the way I jump around quite a lot on the fur does make it a little more random, and that's always good for fur, to not have things too uniformed. But I made a lot of use of pastel pencils in this project, as I often do with a Brindle coat. But especially on the Pastelmat, it really does lend itself to very, very fine detail, and I really could have spent so much longer on this coat. You just seem to get lost in detail on Pastelmat. But for a very detailed portrait like this, that's great. And in this tutorial, I won't bother showing you the eye. You can check out the full project in time-lapse on YouTube. So if you'd like to see how the eye was built up, how I worked on the cushion, for example, you can check out the full piece in time-lapse. I've done many tutorials on eyes and other features though, so be sure to check out some of my other videos on YouTube. And the other Patreon tutorials also cover some of those main features. So this was really just all about building up the Brindle. And I start to use some different shades of light brown pastel pencil. Just trying to add some really fine marks in there, and also add a little bit of warmth into the dark areas. But you can see on the top portion of the head, it's really down to very, very fine detail now, just adding final marks on that area. And then it's just about trying to maintain that same consistency throughout the rest of the piece. And using my trusty pebble of A33, starting to pick out some of the highlights around the eye. And it's such an important area that really gives the dog's character and personality. And it's often why I wouldn't choose to start a painting with the eyes, as I really like to have this whole area built up before I commit to putting the eye in that place. So at this stage, there might well be minor little tweaks that I can make to really increase the likeness in the portrait. I know a lot of artists who start off with the eyes, and it just doesn't really make full sense to me, as I'm often still tweaking proportions and making sure that I've got the eye in the right place at this stage. So if I already had put the time and effort into painting the eye already, then it would be very difficult to move that. Whereas at this stage, I can still move things around, make sure that I've got the structure of the dog's face just right. And I continue going between the pastel pencils and the lighter highlight colours in the soft pastels. Adding highlights, then coming back in with the pastel pencils from the other side, like in this moment, making my marks in the other direction, back into my lighter stripe. Really trying to break everything up. There's really no solid colour in a brindle. Every bit of the pattern is so broken with the other colours. And for the next while, I switch between soft pastel, pastel pencil, just refining and adding more and more detail. Now to work a little on this other eye socket, which is pretty buried in that lovely soft blanket. And you can see that even when I've got some highlight colours down, I can still come back in with the black stick, redarken, redefine some of those areas in shadow. And again, this is just adding another layer, leaving little gaps through which you can see the other layers. And there's such a lovely contrast in this photograph. It's a great example of a photo that can make a lovely painting. If you've got a picture where You can so clearly see the light and the shadow side of the face. It really lends itself to a very successful painting if you can create that 3D effect by your use of colour on both the sunlit and the shadow side. So it really lends itself to a painting, this type of photograph. And it's so important just to try and be that bit more picky or choosy when you're taking on commissions. And I know that that's one of the hardest things to do, because at the beginning you want to say yes to every bit of work. If someone's interested in your work, you really want to do a good job for them. But it's just not always possible if the photo reference isn't very good. And I do still work from some pretty bad photo references. Like if a dog's passed away and I really feel that I can do something that's better than the photo, then of course I will still do that. But I know if I could tell myself previous me from 9 or 10 years ago, I would certainly talk myself out of doing some of the commissions that I took on in the early years. Some of those things can end up doing you more harm than good, both from a portfolio point of view, that if someone else sees that as an example of your work, you might have done a great job for the client from their photo, but it may not be your best bit of work, so it can harm you in that way. And I also found that it used to damage my own confidence a little if I wasn't producing the standard of work that I knew I could, and it frustrated me quite a lot in those projects. So yeah, my advice is always just to try and battle on with a client and drag some better photo reference out of them if it's possible. But also don't be afraid to say no to a piece of work if they haven't got any better photo reference and nothing better is possible. I think given that choice again, I would have turned more work down. But this is a dream of a photograph to work from. Really stunning picture. And with a brindle coat, that's just what you want, to be able to see so clearly all those colours and super fine detail. And I just continue working over those layers on the top of the head. You can see why this was such a long project, as I'm still on this same area. And now when I come in, I'm really honing in on small areas, looking for slight direction in fur as it comes round into the centre of the forehead, and that little crease down the nose, in between the eyes. Each mark I make, the direction of the fur really shows that flow over the bone structure of the face. And for the next while, I use a variety of pastel pencils, and I've speeded this up a little as it's extremely repetitive. I'm making very small little marks, just the very finest of tweaks. And with all that lovely soft pastel already on the paper, I find that the pastel pencils go on pretty nicely, even the lighter colours, because the layers that I've applied already are quite thin, and I've lightly blended it all into the paper. Then I find the Pastelmat's quite able to take some lighter pastel pencil on top. But for the next few moments, just continuing to build up more fine detail with the pencils. And now I get to work on that area surrounding the eye. And it's always a tricky place as the fur seems to do a full 360 as it goes around the eye. But using BE36, and instead of black here, because it's on the sunlight side of the face, and it's quite a highlighted part of the face that I'm working on here. So this darker brown is just dark enough to be able to see through my lighter marks later on. And now with some of my highlight colours, I start to fan those little marks around this corner of the eye. Just making sure to follow the photo reference really closely. Look at the overall shape of the area I'm working on. But of course, the great thing about pastel is if I go slightly wrong here, I make this area a bit too big or a bit too bright, I can always come back in, go dark again, rework the area. The fantastic thing about a good pastel paper, of course, is that you can add lots of layers and still be able to fix things. And I get asked often about using fixative. On a good pastel paper, it's not usually necessary. If the paper is designed to hold on to those many layers of pastel, really the best protection for the piece at the end is behind glass in its frame. So I'm not a huge fan of fixative. I used to use it on the velour in the lower layers, and I found that by giving the lower layer a good spray with fixative, it brought a bit of tooth back to the paper and allowed the next layers to go on. But I don't really find it necessary anymore. By blending and rubbing in my layers, I don't really have the same problem that I did at the beginning. So I know some people do fix and some don't. I tend to avoid fixative as on many papers it really darkens your finished image. So if you are using fixative, I would recommend using it on lower layers and leave all your brightest highlights and top marks unfixed. Now bringing in some white, just starting to pick out that very brightest part of the cheek. And for the next few moments, I work on this area with both the soft pastels and the pencils, just trying to soften what I've already applied and get those highlights in the right places. And now using BE1, I add another layer of highlight around that part of the eye. So where I applied A33 before, it wasn't my brightest colour for that area. But you can see when I add these more yellowy toned marks on, you can still see some of my A33, and it just looks like some hairs are a bit more in shadow than others, so it's just an extra layer of depth and richness to the fur. And I'm really just dotting these marks on, trying to find a little corner of the pastel. But also knowing that I can use a good sharp pencil afterwards to really define those smaller hairs. So now the eye appears, it really starts to take shape. And I continue to work the area around the eye using my lighter highlights. And again, you can see, just as I soften the layers into the paper, that it takes that harsh appearance of my marks. And continuing now with some BE36. Over this side of the face is quite highlighted, so I don't want to make over here too dark to begin with. But I still want to be able to see some texture in the fur over this side. At the same time, I'm really looking at the shape of the muzzle as it comes down here in front of the collar. Just because of the way the dog is lying, it's quite unusual angles. And I'm really just looking, trying to use the negative space behind the dog's muzzle, so that area in darkness. Really trying to look at the overall shape And using some A31. I also don't want my highlights all to be too bright and white. So many little ridges running down this side of the face. And I really just, at this stage, want to make sure I get them right. And I can use my darker pencils to help shape that side of the face from the other side. And now using BE1, starting to commit a little bit more to where the highlights go. But you can see that I'm spending a lot of time thinking, looking at the photo reference. And now it's just about joining some of these parts together, softening the divisions between these ridges so that it doesn't look like hard lines. And just about building up those layers again as I did on the top of the head. But you can really see how much time goes into building up a coat like this. I certainly wouldn't want to have to paint a brindle dog every week. That would be a complete nightmare. But I do enjoy the challenge of one every so often. Chow chows and greyhounds, definitely not dogs I want to paint all the time. And although I love the Pastelmat, I do, in a way, feel that I don't get quite as painterly an appearance from the finished piece. And I find that I have to spend possibly a bit longer on a coat like this because there's nowhere to hide. Pastelmat shows every single mark. And it's difficult to loosen up and try and be painterly. But if it's super fine detail and realism that you're going for, the Pastelmat's certainly great for that. I actually have a baby portrait coming up very soon, and I'm considering trying it on Pastelmat. There are a lot of soft blankets and baby coloured things around the portrait, so I think it might be interesting to try out some skin tones on Pastelmat and see how I go. I also got, this week, pan pastels arrived in the post. They've been kind enough to send me a set to try them out. So I'll maybe try and incorporate some of those into that piece as well. So do a bit of experimenting. But I'm really looking forward to trying out the pan pastels. They look beautiful. I'll do an unboxing video of those within the next week. And hopefully I'll get to test them out. They sent me a lot of the applicators, the little sponges and all of that. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to trying them. It looks really beautiful. And now I come in with a piece of white, which you can see I've just freshly broken this stick so that I can get some really nice little fine highlights. And I go over this little area that I fan around the eye, just picking out the odd hair here and there, really just catching the light, and again adding another layer of depth to this area. So you can see how gradually coming up the colours from dark to light, mainly working from dark to light, coming in with the highlights on the very top layer. And by making all those little marks so small, you should hopefully still be able to see through all the gaps. And again, just blending that into the lower layers slightly, just to soften the effect. And then I can come back in with the black pencil, just bringing some of those little dark marks out from around the edge of the eye. But it's a slow process. You do have to have a little patience. I always find this kind of work quite meditative though. I don't really notice time going. I was really shocked to bring all of this footage into the computer and notice how long the project had taken me. But when you're actually working on it, I'm just taking my time. Try not to rush any area. And in the third part of this long tutorial, I'm going to show you another part of the brindle down the dog's back. And it's a little different. I wanted to include a little of the body brindle, as on the face you can see just how small the marks have to be. The hair on the face is always a lot shorter than on the body. So I wanted to give you a bit of an overview of how I created the brindle with slightly longer hair on the body as well. So that will be in part 3. But to finish off this part 2, I start to work on down the nose. Again, the same pattern using the black stick. And really trying to notice again the strange direction of the fur at each point. It's got to meet in the center of the nose and it fans out down either side of the muzzle. And in particular at this unusual angle in the portrait, I'm just being very careful to get the center of the muzzle correct and start to create that nice texture down the nose. As always, I've included the photo reference for this piece. It will be coming with this month's photo reference, which are free for you to practice on. This piece was a commission, so often my tutorials are made from commissioned work that I've done. And quite often I do own the copyright for the photographs. But always bear in mind that you are creating a copy of my work. And really the tutorials are here to help you in your own projects. With the wildlife and the other photo reference that I provide you, you're free to use it and create paintings that you can sell. But just always bear in mind that tutorials are best used as practice, learning the skills that you can take into your own work and your own commissions. But I do hope that some of you have a go at lovely GG. It's a really good challenge for learning brindle on. And I've seldom come across better photo reference than this for showing all that detail in the brindle. And here I'm just really trying to shape that other eyebrow on the other side. Pick out the highlights that are heading there. And really at this point I'm making the final marks on the forehead. Just trying to get the pattern right up the forehead. In this dark area in the middle, there are a few more shapes to be added in here with my lighter colours. And over the next few moments, I'll try and dot those in and shape them with the pastel pencil. And then I think I can pretty much call the top of the head done. And my next challenge was to work on the muzzle. In part 3 of this, I'll show you just the last bit of work on this area, and then we'll get on to the body. And I really hope you're enjoying the tutorials. I'm getting so much lovely feedback from you all. It's good to hear that all the hard work that goes into making the tutorials is really paying off and that it's helping you. So enjoying seeing all of your work over on the Dusty Forum on Facebook also. If you're a patron and you haven't already, make sure you come over to the Dusty Forum where most of the patrons seem to hang out and share their work and get involved in each other's progress, which is lovely. I know there is a page on Patreon on my channel where you can post your work, but I think these days most people are doing it on the Dusty Forum on Facebook. So come and join us there if you haven't already. It's so lovely to see all of you progress and hear all of your thoughts and your questions. And of course, there's such a lovely group of you patrons who are all taking part in answering questions and giving little bits of critique to each other. It's such a valuable thing as an artist to have other artists who you can bounce ideas off, who are helpful and constructively critical. And it's also great practice for you to give some constructive criticism to other people. It's a big part of being in art college, where you sit around and talk about ideas and share your ideas and your criticisms. So it's such a great thing to see happening on the Dusty Forum. Thanks for all taking part over there. And I look forward to seeing some of your Brindle projects. I hope this will really help you have the patience to create something really detailed on your next Brindle project. So we'll be back soon with part 3. In the meantime, happy pasteling.